First Thessalonians chapter 5 is where we will be this morning. Chapter 5, we'll pick up with verse 7. I think we got down to verse 10 together. So we'll pick up there. We'll start with verse 7, go through verse 10 just to get our context and all of that. So we'll start there in just a moment. Let's have a word of prayer as we begin, and then we'll get started with our class. Father, we're grateful for this day. We're thankful for the safety that we've had thus far, and we pray that you would bless us in our time of study today and also during our time of worship as well. We pray that you would bless us in all that we do for you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Chapter 5, 1 Thessalonians. We're getting close to the end of this book and going to try to do the second book when we get finished with this one. Trying to do that before the end of the quarter. We'll pick up there with verse 7. Good to see those of you who are here today. Cold day, icy day outside. Glad that you're safe and safely made it. We may have more people watching today than we have here, at least during Bible class. And that would be I guess last time was COVID maybe, I guess, when I wasn't here for that. But I'm sure that was a time when that was certainly true. Chapter 5, verse 7. And we'll get our context here, and then we'll get to verse 10 there. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us, who are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation by our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us. Whether we wake or sleep, we should live together with him. That's about where we left off last time, especially verse 9, looking at some of the things here with verse 10. One thing that hopefully you'll remember from last time when we were reading through here, and I think it was Wesley that pointed it out, that there is a comparison here. He begins using the term light and day and night, sleeping and being awake, sober and drunkenness. There is this juxtaposition, this comparison of these two groups that are here, and depending on what he's talking about, they can mean different things. You'll remember because of when we looked at chapter 4, he said, I don't want you to sorrow as, concerning those who are asleep, like those that are in the world. And so he begins there in chapter 4 talking about those who are asleep, meaning those who are dead physically. And then he works with that for a little bit. And then when we get here to chapter 5, he uses the idea of being awake or being asleep as being those who are still living. And you're either awake to Jesus, to salvation, or you are sleeping as in you are of the night, and therefore you are not of Jesus. And so he begins in one place and goes to another comparison. And now here in verse 10, he comes back to that idea there. And so remember in chapter 4, it was all the way down in the last verse there of chapter 4. Why was he telling them about what was going to happen at the second coming? What was the point of his telling them those things? Not just so that they wouldn't be ignorant, but what was the point? Say again? To comfort one another. He says, verse 18 of chapter 4, wherefore comfort one another with these words. And so he's using that discomfort that they had, and he is taking that idea of being sleeping and being awake, and now he gets back to that idea here, chapter 5, verse 10. And so he says there that, Jesus who died for us, so that whether we are awake or whether we are asleep, we are together with him. And so here, this wake and sleep doesn't mean alive spiritually and sleeping or dead spiritually. It means those who are living physically and those who are dead physically. And so he's still playing with that idea of being, of comforting them concerning those that are asleep. You've lost your loved ones. And those who are, that he's writing to, they were under the impression that they would never see them again. And so they began to mourn and weep like those of the world. And so Paul said, you don't need to do that. Because look what happens. They were awake spiritually. They were of the day spiritually. So, and this is verse 10, whether we are awake physically or we are asleep physically, meaning dead, we are together with him. And so he's still comforting them with those words, and he uses the idea of being, sober-minded, being awake, being of the day, as being those who are Christians. And he said, so your loved ones passed away. Were they Christians? Don't sorrow the way that the world does. Don't be like that. Don't be like them. They sorrow because they'll never see him again. Your loved ones who they thought needed to be alive when Jesus came back. And Paul does away with that idea. But he says whether we are awake, which is the ones that are reading this at the time, or whether we sleep. Going back to chapter 4's definition of being asleep. Doesn't matter, because both are together with him. And so this unity that he has developed, or that he has commented on since, was it chapter 2, I believe, 2 or 3, he's this unity of community that they are getting through things together. Not only that, but it is something that goes beyond the physical realm. It's something that goes beyond this life even. And so don't sorrow because they've left this physical community that you've had. You need to be, obviously sorry that, you're sorrowing that happened, but don't be like the world. Don't be like the world and think you're never going to see them again, because whether we wake or whether we sleep, we are together with him, and we should live together with him. So this unity here, as you see on the screen, is something that transcends, or it goes beyond death. The book of Hebrews talks about the hope that we have that enters into that which is beyond the veil. That anchor that's on that solid rock there. And so, again, he's commented on this community, and now he's continuing it to saying it goes even beyond this life. So comfort was his point here, and he's going to say that he's going to use that same word in the next verse as well. But anything here in verse 10, we start with verse 7, go through verse 10. Anything there? Again, he's wanting them to comfort themselves. And this would be a really good example if you were talking to someone, if you're talking to someone about context. Context is really important. In any language, you can use words to mean whatever you want them to, really, if the context is something that you can control. So here in chapter 5 or chapter 4, what does the word sleep mean? And, depending on the context, it can mean, not someone who's not a Christian, or it can also mean someone who's dead physically, depending on the context. So words don't always mean what they think they mean, or what we think they mean. It has to do with the context, and that's certainly a good example here, because he uses them both, but he means them in different ways there. Here, that's verse, I don't know why it says verse 10 right there. That's verse 10 there. So let's go verse 11. Wherefore, comfort yourselves together and edify one another, even as also you do. So he's meant what he has been saying up to this point to be both comforting and also edifying in its words there. And we see that phrase, one another. We're going to talk about that next hour. That's what we're doing, our monthly themes and ideas, and comforting, building up. Let's say that's June or so, June or July, if I look at the calendar correctly over there on the wall. And so edifying one another, comfort one another, he says. The doctrine of Jesus Christ should be something that leads to encouragement. And too many look at it because they have the wrong idea about it. Too many people look at Christianity as a checklist, a list of obligations that we are required to do. What did the Jews of old say? He couldn't be pleased with 10,000 rivers of oil and thousands of oxen that were sacrificed. He's too hard to please. And 1 John tells us that his commands are not burdensome. They're not something that is overbearing on us. This doctrine that Paul is teaching, the one that Jesus brought, is something that should be encouraging to us. It should get us through these difficult times of our lives. And what's more difficult than losing a loved one physically? I mean, that's not having really experienced that, especially as some of you have. But this is a low point for many people, and Paul intends this to be edifying, encouraging. Not that you're not sorrowing anymore, not that you're not sad anymore, but that there is a day coming. There's the morning is coming, and so there's something else there in the future. Whereas the world doesn't see it that way, and so they continue to be sad and to sorrow. And so, wherefore, comfort one another. This doctrine should lead to something that is encouraging, but also notice he uses that phrase, one another. This is something that should be mutual in its in its sharing here. This is a congregational responsibility. It's not an elder's responsibility. We don't have a deacon over encouragement. We do have one over edification, but he's not the only one that applies to. He told all of them, you all should encourage one another. And this is a time of great loss for many of these people. And this isn't the only time we are to encourage one another. But you take this and also what Paul said to the Corinthians about it being a body. When one hurts, the rest of the body, tends to it because it is in need. And so he certainly is affirming here this idea of encouragement, edification, building one another up. And also, as he says there in verse 11, the very end of it, even as also you do. I have an idea, and we'll get a comment here. I have an idea that the church here at Thessalonica was trying their absolute best. There was just this intensity that they were trying to do what Paul was doing. So even when he was correcting certain things, he wanted to be very careful to let them know that he knows their effort. Because he said, chapter 5, verse 1, you don't have need that I write unto you about some of these things. I know you know it, and that sort of thing. Yes, sir, Brother Franklin. In what he said, do you think it goes along with the Jesus account of rich man and Lazarus? Gotcha. The comfort part you're doing. Absolutely. Sure, absolutely. That's one of the things that I think we say sometimes. Be careful how I say this. That we sometimes will say things, and I always try to be careful, when you're talking to someone that's lost someone. But usually when you have someone that's had a long illness, and that sort of thing, and now they're comforted. They're no longer in pain and that sort of thing. And you understand what we're saying when someone says that. I think so. There's something here to the idea of being comforted, encouraging. This world is difficult. It's a tough road. The church here was experiencing persecution, and so maybe there were some who lost their lives directly because of that persecution. And Paul said, encourage those who have lost loved ones to say, look, they're not having to suffer that anymore. So maybe there is something to that with Lazarus being, as it said, how's the wording? He was in Lazarus' bosom. Lazarus is comforted and you were tormented, that kind of thing. Yeah, I think so. Very good. It's a good connection there that I hadn't really made. Anybody else here, verse 11? Comfort yourselves together. That would be interesting to connect those words as well at the number of times that Paul uses them here. Verse 12. And we beseech you, we beg you, brethren, to know them which labor among you and are over you in the Lord and admonish you. So the community has been pointed out, and I keep saying created. Paul didn't create the community. It was already there because of Jesus, but he's pointed it out. He has highlighted the community. Maybe that's the better word. And so now Paul says, comfort, encourage one another. It's a congregational responsibility. But then also he says here in verse 12 that they need to know them that labor among you. So he highlights here the spiritual leadership. So while it's not the elders or the deacons' perhaps responsibility to encourage everyone, though we all have a role there, he says, however, don't forget those that are leading you spiritually. And that can be, Paul when he was there, Timothy, perhaps Apollos and others. Perhaps, and I think he has the idea of elders here that are doing that. Be mindful of them as well. And this is mentioned elsewhere where we have this kind of recognition of those that labor among you, for they watch for your soul kind of thing. And so he's encouraging them to be the community that they need to be, but also be mindful of those who are your spiritual leaders and encourage them as well. Leaders of all walks have knowledge about things that most people don't. They have burdens that most people don't carry. And eldership is no different in that regard. And so there are things that they deal with and things that apply only really to them as far as leaders and things that they are dealing with. So he begs them here, brethren, know them that labor among you and are over you, and those that admonish you. So there is a particular focus here on leadership, and I would say elders and that kind of thing. But know them, understand them, give them appreciation, this kind of thing. Not that they didn't know who they were, and they got to figure it out. Know them, understand them, give them the benefit of the doubt, perhaps. And so there's all of this grace, there's all of this recognition, there's all of this appreciation in this community that Paul is highlighting here, and he specifically points out those who are leading there. We'll mention verse 13 as he says a few more things about those leaders, but anything here, particularly verse 12. So we've got the community, know them. Saw some people still writing. I'll make sure. Sometimes I go too fast. And so, again, know them, understand them, appreciate them, recognize them, and give them the honor there that they not necessarily deserve, but that the office deserves. Verse 13. And here he has that idea: esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake, and be at peace among yourselves. So those leaders, he mentions, verse 12, esteem them, count them worthy here, very highly in love. But notice he says, for their work's sake. There's something about the office of an elder. Now, those who have that office certainly need to be, I don't know if worthy is the right word. They're not living to a certain degree where they are perfect and everyone thinks that they deserve to be that office there. They're fallible. They make mistakes before they were elders, and they're going to make mistakes after they are appointed as such. But the work itself, they're striving to do that the right way. Paul says, esteem them very highly in love for their work's sake. Not necessarily because they're perfect, or they've done everything the right way, or they've done everything the way you think it should be done. But for their job's sake, the office title is the idea there. And certainly some have lived in such a way that they do not need that title and shouldn't be an elder any longer because of things that they've done. But the idea here is the comfort, the encouragement, the recognition that's necessary for. So again, there's this community idea. Everybody has a responsibility to care for each other. For they labor among you, esteem them very highly, and be at peace among yourselves. And so the peace here is connected not necessarily with the leadership, but it's how the others are being led. And sometimes I know that leaders can certainly split a congregation or cause disharmony or disunity in a congregation. But many times there's a certain group perhaps of a local congregation that is more responsible for a split than maybe leadership. And so if you want to be at peace among yourselves, encourage one another. Do things for each other. Recognize your leaders. And as long as they're not leading people into sin, recognize the office that they have here. And so he mentions love, in love for their work's sake, maintaining this peace that's here. He may have something specific in mind. I know that there are several times that I think Paul might be, there's something specific he's talking about. And while we can take a general principle from it, they know what he's talking about. And so there might be something there. Again, we don't know the specifics. There was a lot of persecution in this area, and the leaders at that time may have been trying to, navigate that difficult situation, not the way that certain people thought. And so, Paul may be talking about that. But there's an overall principle here as well. There are a lot of things that elders have to deal with, plan for, and both the physical, like, water being out in a place. What do we do now? It's snowing and there's ice. What do we do? But there's also the spiritual aspect of it as well that they lead. They know things that many don't and have to make decisions sometimes in knowledge of those things. And so the love here, the grace, the understanding, the recognition is there for everyone, but especially here he points out in these couple of verses for those who are the leaders of the congregation. 12 and 13. Anybody there? Yes, sir. Yeah,
We have to be careful not to push them to where they have to make a decision that they really don't want to make.
yeah,
Forget about that part.
right, yeah. Yeah, I was just trying to think, there's, those who are served as elders are worthy of double honor, we're told, because they're watch for your soul. There's a burden there that most of us, thankfully, don't have. And we can make those decisions, in our minds, and everything comes out great. But there's an answer that they're going to have to give one day for how they led. We're going to have to give an answer one day for how we were led, or how we allowed ourselves to be led, whatever the correct syntax is there. And so the leaders have to give an answer for how they lead, but we also have to give an answer for how we were willing to be led. And not that we just do anything and everything, but do we try to live at peace? Do we try to, do we understand? Were we trying to give grace and that kind of thing? So, yes, sir. Sure. Yeah, there's something to be said about having respect for elders in the religious sense, anyway, and because of their office sake, and it goes how to lead is certainly part of it. And I've seen places and been to places where if you were asked to meet with the elders, you're in trouble. That's the only reason that's ever done, and that's not so here. And I do appreciate that, but. How to be led, how they're leading is certainly part of that, and esteeming them very highly is certainly part of that understanding there. Anybody else, 12 and 13? Other places we could go to look at, what Paul and others talk about elders and their need there. But the idea is understanding, grace, love for the office sake. That's the big part. We want people to judge us based on our intentions sometimes, but we don't give that same grace to other people, that's unfortunate. But I guess that's part of the human condition. Verse 14. Now we exhort you, brethren, warn them that are unruly, comfort the feeble-minded, support the weak, be patient toward all men. There's a sermon all right there. Got all the points labeled right out there for you. Here towards the end, beginning right here about verse 14 and going through the rest of the chapter, it almost feels like Paul is running out of paper or ink, and he's trying to get as much as he can just very, very quickly. And so he jumps from one to the next. He's got a lot of things he wants to tell them. He's either running out of time or material or, whatever it is. He's very, very quickly, he is writing to them. We exhort you. Comfort one another. Exhort one another. Paul said, now I'm going to do that to you. So I am encouraging you. Exhortation has a stronger meaning than just encourage you. I want you to do these things. One of the things he tells them is to warn them that are unruly. It might have, again, going back to verse 12 and 13, there might be a specific thing that Paul's talking about, kind of like he did with the Corinthians. He was told that there was division among them, so that's what he was dealing with. But warn them that are unruly. I would assume this is talking about those of the church. Certainly we warn those that are in the world. But the idea here is warning them that are walking differently than the standard that we have. Unruly there, in that kind of idea. So different, again, here in verse 14, different conditions require different kinds of responses. You have someone that is not walking according to what the Bible says. They're living in sin, kind of thing. Warn them. You have those who are feeble-minded, that are discouraged, that are uncomfortable with things that are going in their lives. Well, he tells them here, comfort those who are in that situation. Those who are weak physically, perhaps, but also spiritually, mentally, financially, support them that are weak. And no matter what happens, and I think sometimes we might emphasize that first one that he gives them and kind of leave off on the rest of them, but he says here at the end, be patient towards all men. Patience would be something we could all use and use more of for sure. And so different conditions here in this one verse, he's got people in different categories, and they're not permanent categories, obviously. People can change, and that's why he's giving these different responses. So those who are walking unruly in your midst, warn them. Those that are struggling in one way or another, comfort them. Maybe having to do with what he just finished with chapter 4 and first part of chapter 5. Those who are weak in one way or another, support them. You're all part of this community together. You're all part of this group, this body. And so help each other. In one sense, we are to work out our own salvation in fear and trembling. In another idea, we are to help each other. And I'll kind of use what Brother Franklin just mentioned about elders and apply it to everybody. We should know each other. There is this sense of understanding that's there. And so I don't just, see one or two actions that you do. I understand, what situation you're in and how I can help and that sort of thing. How can we encourage each other if we don't know who's discouraged? How can we support each other if we don't know who's weak? And sometimes we like to, keep put our walls up, and we like to maintain that distance so that, nobody knows what I'm going with. I can handle this on my own. I'll be the one that does this or that. But we are supposed to be those who are together more than just a couple hours a week. We know each other. We understand each other, and we know when each other needs help. And sometimes we can do that without even asking, because we just know. We just see it, and we know. And so there is certainly that. And if I were to point out one thing that the 21st century church is different than the first century church, that would be something I would point to as a whole, is the amount of time that we are together. And I guess that's just part of the world in which we live. It's different in many ways. The culture, the speed of life, the necessities, so-called, that we have in life kind of drive us apart in a certain way. And we have to fight to try to put those distractions and other things aside to understand and be around each other and that sort of thing. So, this is certainly something that we could take part in looking at that and doing more of that. And that's an individual thing that we have to work on as well. But this encouragement, patience, discipline, all of this has its place. And if we are a body, if we are a community, we're going to be able to do those things when it's possible and when it's necessary to do. So different categories of individuals, no matter where we find ourselves or what part of this ministry we have, not only does it need to be appropriate, the response that we give to others, but it also needs to be compassionate. Whatever you're doing, have patience with all people. If you're warning the unruly, be patient. If you are supporting the weak, be patient. And that's certainly necessary and appropriate as well. Verse 14, anybody? Got several things there. We can stop if you want to. Same thing here that he has with verse 15, a little bit more continuing on with that idea of being patient towards all. He says, verse 15, see that none render evil for evil unto any man, but ever follow that which is good, both among yourselves and to all men. Pay attention. Again, context is important. When he talks about things that we do to one another and those that we do to other people. It's not always clear, but when he talks about, yourselves, comfort one another, that kind of, that's talking about Christians, and so we have this community. We certainly want to have patience with everybody, but especially those who are part of this community. Here, he branches it out, and he says, whatever he's going to talk about here in verse 15, do this among yourselves, but also to all people. there is certainly this idea that sometimes we forget in our reaction, in our interaction with those in the world, that what we do reflects what Jesus is. That's what we claim anyway. And many times things that we do or say is not the proper reflection. So Paul warns them here about what you do to others, but also to those that are on the outside. And here, his point, his emphasis here in verse 15, see that. Okay, this is vigilance. This is something you can control, and it's something that you, in certain ways, it has the idea of being, difficult. It's not something that's going to be easy to do. See that. What is it that we need to make sure that we're doing? None of you would render evil for evil unto any man. So the scope here is broad. It's within and it's outside. Don't render evil for evil. There may not be a more human reaction than to do to someone else exactly what they do to you. That is just as human as it is. I mean, and it might begin with siblings. You take something of mine, I'm going to take something of yours. You hit me, I'm going to hit you. You say this, I'm going to say that. And as we get older and wiser and more intelligent, and we can think of things quicker, we are more, we're right there with a quick back at you sort of thing. And so here, and that's, I think it's more severe than that. But when someone does something to you, our immediate response is almost always to do or say something back that's just a little bit worse. And again, that might be human nature, that might be culture, I don't know. But that's something that we can all understand. And Paul says when someone gives you evil, you do not return that. And we like stories about revenge. We like, maybe we like individuals who get back at someone. We like that idea. We like that feeling. But Paul here and in Romans and perhaps other places reminds us that that is not our job. Jesus had the chance to render evil to everyone beyond what they could do to him, and he refused to do it. And while I'm not saying that we should all be doormats in the world, I'm saying that we should not be so like the world that we are, you couldn't tell the difference, because we are so willing to answer in kind. The Christian does not answer in kind with those kinds of things anyway. And there's a reason for it. There are two reasons, I think. He mentions in yourselves. I'm supposed to treat you with patience and with kindness and with understanding because we're part of this body. But then outside, we're also a reflection of what Jesus is. And when someone does something to me and then I get revenge, I'm saying that's what Jesus would do. And I can assure you the world sees that and understands. Jesus himself mentions that. Love your enemies. Be kind. Love them that hate you. That the idea of loving there is not just saying that you do. Okay, it's acting the way that you are supposed to. And so love your enemies. And that's going to make us stand out. Loving each other, as we're going to talk about next hour, and loving our enemies is going to make us stand out more than anything else. Even today, we have such a golden opportunity right now in this present situation to be so much different than the world and stand out as Christians. And many times I think we're not exactly doing that to the best of our ability. And so, again, he's broadening the scope here. Do not render evil for evil to anyone, both to yourselves and also to all men. Follow that which is good. This would be one of the things that I would point to if you were to ask me. Jesus says there's two roads, the wide, smooth, and the narrow, difficult one. What makes the narrow one so difficult? It would be things like this. Loving your enemies, turning the other cheek, going the second mile. Those things aren't easy. And it certainly takes a lifetime to try to get to that point where you can be more like him. But the reward for it and the reasons for it are so important and essential there. There's a whole bunch that we could say about that, and we certainly will if you'd like to. Anything, verse 15.
The commandment there in verse 14, warn those who
Yeah, I would say that as well. A lot of these things are not easy to do. And Paul says them very quickly. He said, verse 15, warn them that are unruly. That's difficult. Have patience with all men. That's difficult, okay? If you have patience with me, it's going to be easy for me to be patient with you. But you got someone that's not patient. Anyone ever worked in human services, like waiting tables and things like that? Those are not easy people to deal with. If you've ever worked in like customer service, people aren't easy. And so, being patient with all people, that's difficult. A lot of these are, if it were easy to do and it was something that we did naturally, I don't know that Paul would even mention it. Jesus said, if you salute only those who salute you, how different are you than the Pharisees? They were already doing that. I want you to stand out. I want you to be different and have that kind of compassion about yourself. Verse 15. And again, how do we do that? That's a very general principle, but it also is something that we can apply to ourselves. I taught something similar to this. We used to live in Alabama, and a man came up to me afterwards and said, this past weekend, I had someone steal my tree stand. Does that mean that I'm supposed to let him have my tree stand, just put another one up, and if he takes that, just keep putting up the tree stand? I'm never supposed to go to the police, this kind of thing. That's not the idea here, okay? Police, the idea of law and people following the law, this is part of, the aspect of love. We need to have that kind of honor among ourselves. But I think his idea here perhaps is more in the direction of spiritual things and that kind of thing. What's my example? If we would take a moment before we act to ask, what are people going to see or think when they see me do this or post this or whatever it is? We don't always do that. But if we did, how am I going to appear to others? Am I going to seem like a vengeful person? Then probably don't need to do that. Am I going to seem like everybody else in the world? Maybe not do that. And so, no, I don't think we need to be necessarily doormats. Jesus was very meek in the things that he did. No one thought he was weak or, not a man or whatever it is that, we want to put on that kind of idea. So don't render evil for evil. Don't pay in kind. You need to pay, owe no man anything, Paul said, except love and good works. That's what we should be known for. Then we get here to verse 16, unless there's anything else there, verse 15. Very, very small 2 words in the English. A couple of these are, very short passages here. Some of the shortest in both the English and the Greek that is here. Rejoice evermore. Verse 16, he says, this is a command. This is a command for us to do. After telling them, don't sorrow like those in the world, comfort one another, this kind of thing, he says, now I want you to rejoice always. This is not a suggestion. This is not a if you feel like it. This is a command that you are to rejoice. And you've heard this before. I'm not going to be the first one to tell you this, if I can tell you at all. The joy that he's talking about here is because of where it's rooted. This community that he's just highlighted, their source is Jesus. So the source of their joy here is why they are rejoicing. Because I don't sorrow like the world, because I know that whether we're awake or whether we sleep, we are with him. Because I don't have to answer in kind and worry about being vengeful, and because all of these other things that he's mentioned, I can be joyful. So it has to do with our relationship, not with our circumstances. You've heard it, I'm sure you've heard it compared to a thermostat or a thermometer. Happiness is the thermometer. It tells you what the situation in the room is. It's hot, it's cold, it's either or. A thermostat controls the temperature. That's what joy is. Joy is like the thermostat. I'm joyful. Hopefully your home is warm, whether it was 16 degrees or whatever it is, or whether it's 100 degrees. It stays the same. So joy is what we're supposed to have, and it's because of the source that we have. I can be patient with all people because of my relationship with Jesus. He's patient with me, therefore I can be patient with others. And you can apply that to all the things that we've talked about. So this joy is continuous. Remember that this church was suffering persecution. They had run Paul out of town, many people here in this area, and these Christians are still behind, and they are doing their best And so Paul, in the midst of that, says, rejoice evermore. Again, it is distinct, it's different than happiness, which always depends on the situation. He's told them not to sorrow. They weren't happy. That's okay. They were struggling because of persecution. That's okay. But their joy should not change. And that's why they can be patient. That's why they can keep from rendering evil for evil and some of these things there. So rejoice evermore, short verse, but it would take a lifetime to perfect that. That's another thing that's not easy. Check off all these things that are easy, and you wouldn't have a check mark in the whole list. Anything there, verse 16. In certain ways, it should never cease. It should continue to increase. What we do with it for sure. Then he says, verse 16, and obviously these are connected, but with verse 17, maybe this is part of how we continue to rejoice evermore. Pray without ceasing. How do you rejoice evermore? Well, perhaps you need to pray without ceasing, kind of idea. And again, not saying continuous, nonstop verbal prayer. There is a constant here. I'll use the term that I've seen: God consciousness, and the idea that what's happening is something that you can get through. There's no situation that's taken you, but such as is common to man, kind of thing. But you understand who is in control. Sometimes when we answer evil for evil, it's because we think we're the ones in control. And so I've got to answer this, because if I don't, it'll never be answered. And so sometimes we do that because we think we're in control. And we worry. We're so anxious for the future because we think we're the ones in control. And while there are things that we can do to improve the future and our situation and our lot, we don't worry to the extent where we think that, I've got to do everything, and if I don't, the world's going to end or it'd be terrible. If we know that He truly is in control, it causes us to rejoice in that fact. I don't have to worry about those things. I do what I can do. I'm patient with all people. I don't answer evil for evil. All these other things that He's mentioned, and I'm going to let everything else take care of itself. I can only control what I can control, and that's it. And so the idea here of praying without ceasing, I think, has the idea of being understanding of who's really in control, but also prayer, the verbal kind, should be a reflex that we have. And far too many look at it as kind of like a lucky rabbit's foot that you pull out whenever you're in trouble, a last resort kind of thing. It should be one of the first things that we do. Why do we have? You can go back to the old days when we used just had the bulletin. But why do we put all those names in the bulletin? Why do we now have this great app that when someone, you'll just be sitting there or doing something, and all of a sudden everybody that's part of this community knows that you need help with something. Pray for this particular person or me. I'm have a test at the hospital tomorrow, and I'm worried about it. And immediately, everybody's there. Is that something that we appreciate, the things that we have there, or not here? Praying without ceasing. Understand who's in control and be ready to talk to that one about those things that are going on there. Anything else? I know our second bell rang, but just as we close. Thanks so much for being here. Glad that you're here today, and we can pick up next time we're together right there.